Today we're going to be making these fun little boxes. These will ultimately be used in my dungeon diorama shelf that I'm currently finishing up. This first one is made out of cause clay, which is a flexible polymer clay. This one is made from popsicle sticks, and this last one I made with coffee stir sticks. Have you heard the quote by this guy that goes, "If you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea"? Well, that quote sums up my feelings about this project, and honestly about a lot of my projects. The individual steps can be tedious and repetitive sometimes, but I'm so excited to see my vision come to life that it doesn't matter how long it takes. After rolling out and trimming my sheet of clay, I add some wood grain texture to it with my wire texturing brush. Once it's baked, I give it a few good slaps, and then I sand off any of the bumpy clay bits that make it look less like wood. I'm surprised at how often I come back to this incredible book for prop ideas, but it's like at least once a year that I look through this thing and admire all the awesome concept art and then decide on a thing to make. Today, it's this box right here. I start by making some cardboard templates of the different plank sizes. Then I use the templates to mark off where I need to cut my baked clay sheets. I thought these narrow planks were a little too thick since they'll be overlaid on the box wall, so I decided to cut them in half to thin them out, like this one here that I thinned off camera, and confirmed I can actually do it without destroying the entire plank in the process. So I get started on thinning the second plank here, and of course I break it. But luckily I did finish thinning the rest of these planks without breaking any of them. I number the plank locations on the back of the box walls before I start cutting them into planks, so that I'm able to rearrange them correctly later. And since I don't want the planks to have these clean cut edges, I sand all of their edges, one by one. After cleaning up all the clay dust that got everywhere, I rearrange the planks again into their corresponding box sides, and I glue each box side back together with some baked clay strips and some clay glue. I'm still surprised at how many uses I've found for these 1, 2, 3 blocks, from obvious things like weighing pieces down, to pushing and holding glued pieces together, to being like a pencil holder of sorts to help me hold up pieces that are freshly painted or varnished so that I can minimize how many surfaces they touch. And in this case, helping me maintain a right angle for these wall pieces while I glue them and while they're being baked in the oven. I add this cube of baked clay here just in case the walls start falling during baking. The cube will hopefully stop them from sagging too much, and the foil will stop the cube from getting adhered to the walls. For the fourth wall, I add some Sculpey glue on the edges that will be adhered, and then I question my decision for a few seconds. And I decide to go for it. I fit the fifth wall in place to see where and how much I need to trim before gluing it on. And I trim it, sand it, glue it, and bake it in place. Since I wanted this box to be functional, I decided not to glue the final side on. I also had to trim one of the inner support pieces on this final wall to make it fit properly, but with that, the trickiest parts are done. For the metal latch details, I initially just baked the thin sheet of clay that I was going to cut into the small latches after baking them, but then I realized it would be a lot easier and make a lot more sense if I just baked the clay in the proper shape to begin with. So I gently pushed some thin sheets of clay against the box and baked them on there. After baking them, they came off of the box pretty easily, partly because I didn't push them down too hard to begin with. Only one of the sheets ripped in a tiny spot that you can see there. So I trimmed these down to roughly the right size and shape for my metal latches. And off camera, I trimmed them all more precisely and sand their edges so that they're rounded. Next, I start gluing the narrow plank detailing onto the box, But after gluing this first one, I see that it's not laying flush on the box. And of course, I try forcing it to magically be flush by pushing down on it, but that's not how that works. So I remove the plank, clean off all the glue, and trim the part of the box that's jutting out. And understandably, my camera was not interested in any of this. I reattach the plank and it looks a lot more flush. I also add some more glue in the small gap that's left to clean it up. As if I haven't spent way too much time on this one clay box already, I decide that I need to weather the exposed plank edges. So I use a metal file to do that. After gluing on and baking the 8 metal latches and the 2 diagonal planks, this baby's ready for paint. You know, for how long this took me to make, I definitely don't recommend making this by hand rather than just 3D printing one of these. Unless, of course, you enjoy the creation process, which I absolutely did. My first step in painting is adding a base layer of dark brown acrylic paint, which took about 3 coats to cover the gray clay. I waste some brown paint on this paper towel before dry brushing the box brown. Then I add a lighter brown dry brushing layer, which is when the wood texture starts popping beautifully. And I finish it off with an even lighter brown, cream at this point, gentle dry brushing. After painting the metal latches with a gunmetal acrylic paint, I coat the entire box with a matte acrylic varnish, and then I apply a matte Mod Podge over the metal latches. I don't know why this Mod Podge is labeled as matte, because it's definitely not matte, but it's also not satin or glossy exactly. It's got just the right kind of shine and texture finish for metallic things. So I'll usually alternate between using this and a satin varnish for metallic finishes. Alternatively, if you want to make a wooden box, you can use, wood. Not only is it faster to make a box out of wood, but it's also much cheaper than using clay, and arguably more realistic looking. I use my little serrated Olfa blade to saw the popsicle sticks into planks. And after doing that a bunch more times, I've got all these planks that need to be cut into narrower planks. But first, breakfast. Here are the final planks after I finished cutting them into narrower pieces and sanding their jagged edges. And I've arranged them into their box formations so that I know what pieces need to be glued where. To adhere the planks together for the bottom of the box, I use these coffee stir sticks because they're a lot easier to cut. And that's thanks to this awesome tool, which took me a while to find the name of it, but it's called a hobby chopper. When I researched these, I found this much fancier and much more expensive version than mine, but look at it, it's so fancy. And it's 3 volts apparently? That doesn't make sense. Oh, and I found this even cooler hobby chopper too. How awesome would it be if he could actually be my wood cutting tool? He's so cute. After trimming all my coffee stir sticks to the same length, I use some Elmer's wood glue to adhere them to the bottom planks of each box. With the box bottoms done, I start attaching the first walls to them. I'm using my 1, 2, 3 blocks again to hold everything together and to maintain a right angle while the glue dries. I also glue each individual plank to each other for the side walls, and then I use some of these craft toothpicks as the support beams for each box corner. For the short sides of the box, I decide just to add a bottom plank and a top plank so that there's a gap where you would be carrying the box. At least that's my excuse for adding the gap. The real reason is that it's easier to make sure the top edge of the box is even when I can decide how high up to put the plank. I also add some more glue to the toothpick support beams. And here's the box after the glue has dried. The top edge is very much not even, So I trim the support beam as well as one of the walls so that it doesn't look quite as ridiculous. And it looks fine. Since a lot of glue ended up on the outside of this box, I use a sanding stick to try to sand as much of it off as I can. I also use my X-Acto knife to add some weathering to the wood to give it some deeper grooves that I can highlight even more once I dry brush it. Next, I stain the box with some watered down brown acrylic paint. And once the stain dried, I noticed that there were some large areas where the stain didn't stick. And I'm pretty sure those were the spots where I wasn't able to fully sand off the wood glue. So, to minimize the amount of glue that seeps to the outside of the box, for my second one, I glued some inner support beams to each long wall, instead of gluing each wall plank to each other. And that did the trick. Here's the second box after staining. Nice and clean. And now for the fastest box process. The coffee stir stick box. Not only does this chopper make trimming these sticks a breeze, but the assembly process is also much faster and easier to get everything more rectangular and even. Oh, and what also made this easier was that I only had to trim these on one side, and I made myself these little templates of all the piece sizes that I would need for each box. Using my little templates, I mark off on each coffee stick where I need to chop, and then I get to chopping. After sanding the cut edges of each plank, I start assembling the bottom part of the box, using the same process I used for the popsicle stick boxes. After that's dried, I add some glue to the sides of it and attach the first two side planks. Once again using my super useful 1-2-3 blocks, and I add my third wall piece and the fourth wall piece. For the vertical support beams, I use 2 stir stick pieces attached in an L shape. And here's my box in its tiny table phase. After that, I just glue the remaining wall planks on, making sure that they're all lined up properly in relation to each other. And that was a lot easier than it sounds. And I start with the top planks so that it's easier to know where to center the middle planks. And now my beautiful little box is ready for staining. Oh, and so are all the other boxes I made that I didn't stain yet. So I stain these guys one by one, making sure not to drop any of them, and making sure not to get a single drop of stain on my hands. Then I start the multi-layer process of weathering, which I honestly don't know how many of these steps are even necessary to make these look weathered enough, or what even is weathered enough. But I start with adding some watered down black ink to the corners of the boxes to make them look dirtier. And I add some brown dry brushing, then some mustardy gray dry brushing. And since my dry brushing made these look too clean, I dirty them up again with my watered down brown paint. And I finish them off with some matte varnish. And it's finally time for our photo shoot. But first, let's give Epona some pettings, because look at her, she's so cute. All right. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.